Welcome to Evolving with Every Step, your safe space for unearthing life's lessons. We're your sisters, Ashley and Brittany, and together we will explore the depths of life's experiences.
We will discuss the growth and expansion that comes when we get curious around what these experiences can teach us. So take a seat, join the conversation, and let's evolve with every step we take. We are so happy you're here. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Evolving with Every Step. We are so excited you're here to join the conversation today. But before we dive into our topic, Brittany, you had a birthday just a few days ago. Happy birthday. How was that?
Thank you again. It was good. My birthday was March 1st, and it was a great birthday. First, I started the day with my husband had decorated our living room with birthday streamers and balloons everywhere, which made it challenging with our new puppy to keep top of the balloons. And got a facial, then went out for dinner, had a lot of visitors, including you and mom, and just having the whole family over yesterday, feeling very blessed with all the love I got and reflecting back on the last year. And when I was 30, now I'm 31, a lot has happened. A lot can happen in a year, including starting this podcast, getting married, getting a puppy, renovating a house, getting my life license. I find it strange when people get upset about getting older because it's such an accomplishment each year we get to live on this planet and the things that we can achieve that I get excited. I'm like, all right, let's see what this year has to hold.
It's so true. It's so true. I think because people do get freaked out, but I just think of all the lessons you've learned and you now to get to carry all that wisdom into your next year. You're just like, you're so much better equipped for the next year to come than you were the year before.
Bring it on.
Yeah. And you notice as you get older, you start to like some of these accomplishments that you've had over this past year, they weren't even planned. Like there was nothing in the plan of you guys getting a puppy.
No, that was very last minute.
And now
last minute decision.
Now little Cody's running around. He's still adorable. He's a part of the family. And so I don't know. I think every year is just another opportunity to see what kind of amazing blessings are going to come into our life. And yeah. So 31, I think this one's going to be a great one for you. So I'm excited.
You are 2 years older than me. Any tips in the 31st year?
Oh my goodness. I would just say keep doing what you're doing.
All right.
You just gotta, oh man, I think you already know it. Like you said, don't get caught up on a number. Don't get wishing you were in your 20s. I would say, I'm heading into my 33rd year and my 30s are far better than my 20s just because I've learned so much about myself.
Yeah.
I know what works with me, what doesn't, and I know the things I need to keep myself healthy and feel good. And also just my perspective on what I care about has changed so much,
Yeah.
And so there's a bit more freedom going into your 30s, I feel like. And you're really good at aligning yourself with the right things. So just keep doing that. And I think this year you're just going to see even more wonderful things come through.
Right on. So what's going on with you, Ash, since I saw you last night? We had a quick conversation on the drive home. We've had very little separation between now and then. What happened after our phone call?
Well, I continue to drive home. We live about an hour apart. So came home, got myself ready for the podcast, said hi to Camille, my boyfriend, because we'd been apart for 24 hours and I missed him. Yeah. And had some food and then jumped on here. It's been a nonstop weekend. So I am really happy to talk about our topic today. I'm also going to be really excited for some downtime afterwards before we get the work week started.
Yes. So without further ado, let's get into the topic because this is we were getting quite heated talking about it earlier today. So today's topic we're going to get into is boundaries, as you would have seen from the podcast title, but no surprise there. Before we get into the topic, we just want to go through our disclosure again for those who are jumping in for the first time. We are not mental health professionals. This podcast is in no way to replace therapy and or any medical intervention you might need. We're coming into it as students in life. And being a student of life, it means that the lessons never stop. So we hope that you come here to join us, continue learning together, and grow each and every day.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's get into it. Let's talk about boundaries.
Into boundaries. So, Ashley, why don't we tell our listeners why we decided on discussing boundaries for today's episode?
Yeah. We felt that this just fit so organically in after our last two episodes, which was on gaslighting as well as on resilience. A big theme that showed up in both of those is talking about how important it is to build a strong relationship with yourself,
Mhm.
really understand yourself and your values, because that provides such a compass to whether you think you're being mistreated, for example, in gaslighting, or it's a compass to know when things are you're being pushed too far and you need that break. And what can really help us to recognize those things sooner, whether you're in a bad relationship or you're being pushed to the edge, is having boundaries set. Because we can start recognize when we have those boundaries set, we can start to recognize when things are crossing the line, and then we can address them accordingly. And it's going to follow a very similar theme. We will talk about it, that it's going to come into really understanding what your values are and what's really important to keeping yourself healthy. And then we will talk about through this how we were raised without an example of setting boundaries, and also kind of trained on how it could be detrimental to us to set those boundaries, what that kind of looked like for us as we were getting older and going into different areas of life. And then
Mhm.
what have we learned since then, and what are we still working on now?
I'm excited to get into it. Ash, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience of having a lack of boundaries and how that showed up for you going out into the real world after childhood?
Yeah, so I think we saw this in a couple ways with growing up. The one was, you look and you watch your parents and the ways that they interact with people, as examples of how you're supposed to interact with people in the world, right? And as we've talked about in our previous episodes, our mother was a big people pleaser, and she often allowed people within the family to cross her boundaries quite often, and she didn't do anything about it. And again, as we talked a bit about in our gaslighting episode, she was trying to keep the peace, and that's how we started to interpret that that's what nice and good people do, is they just take it and they don't set those boundaries with people. And so we were raised to start thinking we need to just not, like, whoever's pushing you, just find a way to tiptoe around it and then move on. There was no setting up saying, "Hey, that wasn't right. Don't do that again."
Mhm.
There was also this piece though with our father, as he especially got into drinking and became verbally and emotionally abusive. We saw this in other parts of the family as well, even before that happened, where there's this big theme of conditional love. And so we never had really good examples of when people disagreed with each other or they were unhappy with each other. It wasn't like people fought, got over it, and it was fine, or fought and talked it through and then everything was good. It always was someone got upset with someone else and then they cut them off. And so
Mhm.
we watched this happen so often. And then even as our father got really bad into his drinking and he just wasn't himself anymore, we watched him constantly cut people in and out of his life. And it
Oh,
would
yeah.
be one weekend we were talking to our grandparents and everything was fine. And then the next 2 months, we didn't talk to them because they are awful people and they've done this to us and I'm cutting them off. I'm not talking to them. And we saw this happen with so many different people in the family. And our dad didn't just do this, it was other people in the family did it as well. And so we were just taught that if you upset someone, it means complete rejection and being ostracized
Mhm.
from the family. And that's naturally, as humans, like, rejection like that is very scary.
Yeah.
And so we were just taught that if you upset people, or and setting boundaries, like if you say something that would just upset them, you're gonna get cut off. So, we were always kind of raised to be a bit more timid, and whoever was the loudest and the strongest personality, we just kinda went and adapted with that just to keep
Mhm.
from being rejected. But the unfortunate thing is you then grow up and you go into, for example, I'll use the workforce as an example. You go in and you're just saying, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." because you don't know how to set that boundary for yourself, even though you're stressed out. You want to speak up when things are getting too tough, but you're now in a state, or I was in this state where I thought I'd get fired then. Like, that's the
Yeah.
extreme I went to because we were
Wow.
raised on that extreme.
Yeah. It was so I it's funny how, like, you forget these things after you've left that environment. The conditional love was so big that not just, like, in the work world, but in, like, friendships and stuff too, always being afraid that you were gonna get cut off for
Mhm.
maybe setting a boundary somewhere for something you weren't comfortable doing, or activity you weren't happy to be engaging in. It's so true, and I saw it similarly. We were even, like, told things as young kids that parents shouldn't be telling us, like, things of, like, drama going on in the family. So then as a young kid, like you said, you're starting to form these opinions based off of these experiences that your parents are sharing with you when really they should be
Mhm.
keeping it between themselves and letting kids be kids.
Yeah.
So because we were confronted with such mature topics at an early age, we were also forced to create mature mindsets at an early age too, without having that freedom of being a kid and learning also the healthiness of boundaries between family members and friendships. Because this type of communication happened between friendships as well. So I also noticed the same thing when we get out into the real world with work, like you said, the being the yes man. And they love that. They love a yes man in the corporate world who I'm going to give her this and she's going to take it. Let's just keep giving her more because she's going to keep saying yes to us. She's going to get the job done and does it well. Meanwhile, you're breaking down by the time you get home and you have nothing left for yourself. So this goes into how boundaries can be the ultimate form of self-care to help with your mental health, your
Mhm.
spiritual health, your physical health, because boundaries don't exist just between relationships. They exist in so many facets of your life and they create structure for you on what life are you going to tolerate? What life are you trying to build for yourself?
100%. And something that was really interesting, my first time ever going to counseling was when I was in university. And this was like my first counseling session. And I then didn't go to another one for a while. But I remember providing them a bit of history on what it was like growing up and all of this stuff. And even how we were overshared, like what was going on with the family financially or the drama or whatever. And I remember the counselor saying, um, that's crossing a serious boundary. Like, why were you told this stuff at such a young age?
Yeah.
Why were you aware of why are you even being pulled into things now? Like, this has nothing to do with you. And I didn't get that. Like,
Mhm.
my father's drama was my drama. Like, that's just what I thought. And we were kind of pulled into that world where it just fully took you over. And I remember talking to a family member about what the counselor said, and they're like, "Yeah, but this is just how life has always been. So, I mean, do you really expect people to just stop telling you things? Like, that's probably not going to happen." And I mean, bless them. But that is so incorrect. And that's something I
Yeah.
do want people to get that this is where setting those boundaries get really difficult because when you are thinking about setting boundaries, in relationships that you've had for a long time, it's really uncomfortable because people are used to being able to talk to you about certain things, get certain things from you. And when you're not fulfilling that for them anymore, it can be really uncomfortable. And you know what? Sometimes it's not always, sometimes just the conversation's uncomfortable. But I can tell you that as I've set certain boundaries with people in my family, the ones who really do love me and care about my well being have respected it. They
Mhm.
weren't necessarily, like, loving it because 'cause they're like, "Well, I'm just so used to talking to you about this stuff, like, what do I do?" But they
Well,
figured it out. They found different avenues, more appropriate avenues of people to talk to about certain things, and so I just wanna say that if somebody says to you, "Well, this is just how it is in our family," you don't have to take that as
no.
the end all be all.
No, and another thing to point out is that when you start setting boundaries with people too, you can get a couple different reactions. One being that they can be acceptant of it. One being that they can take it personally as an attack on them. like, "What are you saying? There's something wrong with, like, what I'm saying to you. How can you do this to me?"
Mhm.
Would be a famous words coming out of their mouth,
Mhm.
or someone just saying, like, they can may take it hard, but they understand, like, "Okay, this will be tough for me to set that boundary with you, but we'll work through it." And in all those phases, you can kinda gauge where that person's mental health is and where their triggers are right now because they haven't worked on them themselves. And if they haven't set boundaries for themselves in life, they're gonna feel like they're being deprived of something. But eventually, if they are acceptant and work through the boundary with you and setting it up, you end up having much healthier relationships in the end, much healthier and happier because you know where each other stands.
Yeah. And so and you're gonna start to find, and this is where it can get a bit tricky, is you might come across people that are just not gonna respect it.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you do have to make a decision of, can I handle it? I mean, you can do what you can to limit certain communications and things like that. But sometimes, and it was in our case with our father, that boundary was never going to be respected because when we tried to talk about it, we were constantly shut down. And again, the script got flipped on us that we were the problem.
Yes.
Then we had to make the decision that, you know what, you can't respect my boundary. And I'm not talking about just someone saying things that annoy you. I'm not talking about people who are just annoying. I'm talking about people that are straight up abusive
Mhm.
and make you feel like the scum of the earth. There's no reason for someone to make you feel that way. And when somebody is negatively impacting your mental health, sometimes we are met with a decision of, I might have to walk away from this relationship. And then that becomes the boundary. And so it's not an easy thing to do this, and we don't wanna talk about setting boundaries as it is so easy. It will be easier in certain areas than others, but it can be very difficult to have to make a decision like that, especially when it comes to family and people you're really close with.
Yeah, they may have to be really, really small incremental boundaries that they're not even noticing that you set up. Like there's people in the family where I know the topics that I can and cannot discuss with them, and I just choose to give them maybe surface level details about what's going on in my life because I've set the boundary that I don't want to hear their opinion on certain things. Like, I respect you, but our lives are very different. And that's where I start setting small boundaries there. And
Mhm.
they don't even know that's the case. And then you build up towards that. I've even had incidences where family members have inappropriate conversations at inappropriate timing of family events. Call them afterwards and say, you know what? I don't have a problem discussing this with you, but let's do it at a more appropriate time. Let's have
Mhm.
a more appropriate setting to talk about this because I want to hear what you have to say. And man, did that change the relationship, like, in a positive way.
Mhm.
They respected me for setting that boundary and approaching them in a loving way to do it, not yelling, not confrontational, but just in a way where we're 2 humans wanting to hear each other out. Just do it in a better setting.
Yeah. And so what we have to do here is it's like we said, it's really important to get connected in with yourself and ask what are your values and how do you want to feel in these relationships or how do you want to feel at work? How do you want to feel
Mm,
in your day to day? And that is what's going to help you set the boundary. If you've been raised in a situation where you're taught that people pleasing is the way to be accepted and that if you were to upset anyone, it's instant rejection, it's going to be difficult to set those boundaries because your value is based on pleasing other people. And
mhm.
that's what happened with us. That was where my value is. And understood boundaries were important, but something that actually helped me really understand this was watching other people in my life who were really good at setting boundaries. I have some friends and family, and I won't name them, they know who they are. They are fantastic at this, and I admire them so much. And I realized the difference between them and me is they value their peace over comfort, where I was valuing comfort over peace.
So, can you explain that further for our listeners, the difference between comfort and peace? Because they might not understand that.
Yeah. So when we are people pleasing, we are providing ourselves a certain level of comfort. And I do believe it comes from more of a place of trying to just survive in a situation than to really thrive in it. So if you know that just say you have someone that constantly wants to stop by your house, unannounced, anytime, and that really bothers you. It's intruding your private time, you're not scheduled for it, and you really feel like it's hitting like it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
If you choose not to say anything, it's because you don't wanna start an argument, and you're like, "If I don't, it'll keep the peace, and at least I know that they're not gonna reject me. I know they're happy with me. I'll just take comfort in knowing that they're happy with me."
Mm.
But there is an internal piece going on where you're really irritated. You might be really pissed off, actually.
Mhm.
And so you might have that survival or that I'm not going to be rejected comfort, but then you're going to live with that inner, what's the word, like strife or
Yeah.
there's going to be that storm
Resentment.
inside you. Yeah. Where you're just like not happy about the situation. Or you can get uncomfortable and have the conversation and say, look, I really appreciate you and I love when you're around and we have a great time. But it's really important that you reach out and ask first if you can come over because we have certain plans and I just want to make sure that that I can be present when you're here. That's really
Mhm.
uncomfortable. But what happens is if you have that conversation and they go, "Yeah, no problem." You've now said, "I'm willing to get uncomfortable so that I can live in peace." And the
Mhm.
thing that people forget, and this is something that I had to learn, was that comfort that I am giving myself in that moment is literally just for that moment.
Yeah.
And then I am in turmoil for days and days and days because when someone's not respecting your boundary and like to be fair, we can't expect everyone to understand what our boundaries are. And we don't want to assume they're crossing them on
Yeah.
purpose. They might not even know it. But when
That's
you
true.
think your boundary, if the boundary you have is not being respected, you are never going to feel fully safe in your life because you're just waiting for someone to go ahead and cross it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is it's funny that you say that people may not know your boundaries. Most of the time, they don't know the boundary that you have set for yourself, and I think that's a really big thing to having successful relationships is to vocalize your expectations from that relationship partner, whoever it might be, the behaviors that you're looking out for with those boundaries in place. And I guess when with your explanation of comfort and peace, I would say comfort comes from more of an external thing of like what's between you and that person. Is it just to keep that other person happy, and peace is your inner self? Am I going to resent this person afterwards? Am I going to resent this decision?
Mhm.
Or am I going to be at peace with knowing the boundaries that I've put in place? It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
And people aren't mind readers. Like you have no
Mhm.
idea what's normal in their world with their family or their friends. And oftentimes you'll find that people might feel bad because they didn't know they were crossing a boundary. But if they're truly want to be a part of your life and they care about you, they're going to respect it. And
Mhm.
if they're not, and so here's the other thing, like this is a great way to weed out the people that aren't for you in your life. If you set a boundary and they can't respect it and they take it personally and they try to make you feel bad about it,
Mhm.
then they're not meant to be around you, or you got to limit your time with them because these are people that are always just going to take and they're never going to give.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a lot about boundaries with other people, but I think what some people don't look at as much as boundaries within themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, do you have some examples of ways that you set boundaries for yourself?
So I realized that I was just kind of letting my mind run wild, like an untrained puppy. You used that example before in our conversation, and I thought it was
Mhm.
so great. It's like take an untrained puppy and throw it in your house and see what it's going to do. It's going to get into areas it shouldn't. It's not going to know that, it shouldn't, like, maybe chew on its bone for 20 hours. And I'll say, like, for example, social media, you're like, oh, let me
Yeah.
scroll on TikTok for the entire day. I had to realize that in order to make sure that my health, physical health, and mental health was okay, I had to start setting boundaries in certain areas with myself. And those boundaries are literally I call them routine.
Yeah.
So it's, getting to bed at a good time, trying to be more conscious of what time I am spending on social media because that really is we will have a whole topic on social media because I feel like we could talk for an hour on this.
I feel like
But when
every
you're
topic we discuss, you can tie in social media into that in some
yeah,
way. But yeah, go on.
it's because when you're scrolling, you don't know what the next thing is gonna be. So
Yes.
you really don't have there is no boundary up there to protect you from any kind of negative thing that's coming through. And it's such a comparison thing too. You're comparing yourself to other people you see. It's
Mhm.
it's the Wild West, I feel like, for
Yeah.
it's like throwing your brain in the Wild West and hoping for the best. That's what I feel like social media is. And so making sure that you're really conscientious of the people and the accounts you follow, the amount of time you spend on it, and then also setting boundaries with how much exercise, all this stuff. It's all about making sure that if you give your brain an inch, it'll run a mile with anything. And so it's really setting that discipline.
Yeah. Such good examples. I think what's important too is understanding your values and what you're looking to get out of life and
Mhm.
what behaviors can you adopt that then inadvertently set boundaries for yourself to live up to those values. And you brought up a quote that my husband said in the past to you. If you are acting based off of your values, you have nothing to regret.
Yeah.
So if you are if all of your behaviors throughout the day meet up or get you a little bit closer to your goals or what you're looking to get out of life, then you have nothing to regret out of that day that you just held. So I feel the same way. Like for me, we didn't really have any boundaries in place with childhood where we kind of had to figure them out on ourselves. My mind also ran wild like a puppy, and puppy is just such a relevant
Yeah.
example in my life right now, seeing the damage that he can do if I don't have gates up. So you have to put gates up in certain areas of your life to protect
Mhm.
yourself, not block experiences out, but to protect yourself from the things that don't feed into you. Block out things that are going to take the energy away from you. So like you said, social media, I used to be so bad at like that was the first thing that I would see in the morning. And then
Mhm.
if I saw something negative or I saw something that made me compare my life to that person or my
Mhm.
body image to that person, there goes my mindset for the day. It's it's gone. And you brought up a um really great point from Mel Robbins when
Mhm.
she said, when you wake up in the morning, do you want to have that one um one friend that you used to talk to 10 years ago in your bedroom? Or do you want to have that maybe you do want to have that movie star in your bedroom that you really admire, whatever. But no, you wouldn't want to have somebody that's basically a stranger entering your room first thing in the morning, and that's what happens when you open up social media before you
Mhm.
get out of bed. So, the decisions we make on how we carry out our day can be boundaries, but also turn into routines because you don't see them as a boundary anymore. You see them as something that feeds into the life that you want to live.
And I love that you brought up that quote that Ollie gave to me. It was during my dating years, and it was the thing that just carried me through all of it, and now I've applied it to so many areas of my life, and I think this is really helpful to people who are people pleasers because it is really uncomfortable when you're trying to set boundaries with people, and when you set the boundary and it's the right thing to do, I'm gonna tell you for days after, you're gonna feel like crap because that part of yourself is like, "Oh, no." They're so upset they're gonna be
Mad at
so upset with
me.
me. Yeah, it's really uncomfortable, but this is why when we talk about understand your values. What do you need in your life? What do you want your life to look like? What's important to you? And then what do you need to have in place to make it happen? If that's an important value to you, then when you are setting that boundary with someone, you don't have to regret what
Yeah.
happens. If you do it respectfully and you're going, this is what I value and this is what I need for my life, I need you to respect it. It's just going to help give you a foundation, and then you can keep going back to that value when that voice comes in your head and goes, "You're gonna be mad at you. You're a bad person." Go back
Mhm.
to your value. Because I would want to ask people listening, if someone said to you, and for my people pleasers here, if someone said to you, "Look, do you mind not texting me every single day? I'm trying to spend less time on my phone. Can you maybe just text me like once a week or whatever?" How many of us would probably say, "Yeah, okay,
Because
no
how many of
problem."
those text messages are probably meaningless, like,
Yeah.
so unnecessary? Or even if that's not the case, I guess you just have to set boundaries on your own behavior of saying to your friends, "Hey, I'm only gonna be responding to text messages this time on this day. So if you don't hear from me, it's not that I'm ignoring you. I'm just not going to be available to answer you until this day." They'll probably even hold off from texting you as well on that
Well,
time too.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I've had friends and because my friends and I all we do our social media detoxes, and so we let each other know that's a boundary we're setting, saying, "Hey, don't send me anything," because sometimes people will text TikTok things for you. We'll be like, "Hey, just don't send anything to me for the next bit. I'm gonna take about a couple weeks off social media. I need to do a detox." And it you
Mhm.
just this is what I think when I'm setting a boundary and I'm worried someone's gonna be upset, I think, would I be upset if someone said this to me? No, because I actually care about this person, and if this is what they need, and it's not asking anything crazy of me,
Mhm.
like, we can talk about how sometimes people can use boundaries as a weapon, but chances are you'd be really respectful of it.
So we can set these boundaries as well in the work world where from day one at a new job, you could set that boundary like, these are my working hours. I will not be checking my emails. I will not be checking my phone once I am logged off or once I leave this office, because that is when my family time starts.
Mhm.
Setting those boundaries in a workplace from day one at a new job, they will respect it. And it may be a little bit harder once you've had the habit of picking up your phone outside of working hours. It'll be a little bit harder to set those boundaries, but people will eventually catch on.
Yeah.
It,
And I do wanna just bring up because as we're talking about work life, like work and setting those boundaries for a work-life balance, in the previous podcast, I mentioned how, it's not a company's responsibility to make sure you have work-life balance. And what I wanted to clarify around that is that, of course, to a certain extent, employers should be making sure that they're not putting 2, 3 people's worth of work on you. And unfortunately, we are in a culture now where we're seeing in corporate where that's not the case, and people are getting overworked all the time. I think like what you're talking about with setting those values is don't wait for someone to give you the
Mhm.
work-life balance. Don't wait for your job. Like we talked about with relationships with people. People can't read your mind. So if you're going to keep taking things on, people are just going to assume you have the bandwidth for it or that you can handle the stress and you'll just keep taking and taking. It's really important that you value your peace over your comfort and you speak your mind when you're at work to your manager and say, "Hey, this is what I'm capable of doing in a day," and to not go crazy
Mhm.
and make sure they're aware of it. And then that
Yeah.
way if they end up not respecting it, you can then make a decision for yourself, and this is where we own that. You can make a decision, do I stay here where it's not gonna get respected, or do I
Mhm.
to take a chance and find something new where I might have more respect in the position I'm
Mhm.
in?
Absolutely. You need to give them an opportunity to know where you stand before making any sort of big action. That's just like out of our experience, anyways, because like we said, they can't read your mind. They don't know anything's wrong until you tell them something is wrong, and give
Mhm.
them the opportunity to change behavior, change structure, whatever it might be, before making any sort of drastic move.
Exactly. I've been kind of hearing people weaponizing boundaries in a sense, and so I do wanna speak to that piece because it's really sad that people are using the word boundary as a way of trying to control people. And so this is just some stuff I've been hearing. And just be cognizant of it because again, I think it's so important and what we're trying to do in this episode is talk about how important it is to set boundaries and even respect other people's boundaries. But I want to, and this is where it ties back very much to understand your values, understand what's important for you. But if they're saying things where they're trying to be bit more controlling and they're saying, "You're crossing my boundary by spending this night every week with a friend," or "You're crossing my boundary by wanting to hang out with your family." Be cautious of that because sometimes people who can be a bit more manipulative will try to disguise their controllingness
Yeah.
as boundaries. So, this is why it's so important to understand your values because if you are in a friendship or relationship or whatever it is, and someone says, well, you spending time with your mom is crossing my boundary, stop and ask yourself, well, how much time am I actually spending with my mom?
Yeah.
Is it once a week? That's not so
Mhm.
bad. Is it every single moment of every day? Maybe excessive. Um,
Fly
like,
to the nest, little bird.
yeah, spread your wings, fly away.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but ask yourself, like, well, maybe to that person, maybe they're not close with their family. And so seeing their family once a week or every couple weeks is just, they don't understand it.
I actually have
If
a funny story about that. When Ollie and I first started dating, because those who don't know, we went on 2 or 3 dates first time around. He broke it off with me and then we got back together 6 months later. And what kind of drove him to break up with me the first time is that I mentioned that I had a conversation about him with my mom. And my mom, Ashley, and my mom are all very close. We're like friends level close of what we talk about, and he's not used to that because he has different dynamics with his parents.
just a more
So,
traditional relationship with his
more
parents. Yeah.
traditional parent-son relationship, us is very untraditional, I would say.
Mhm.
So, it freaked him out where he's like, "Whoa, this girl's like, thinks this is so serious already. She's already talking to her mom about me." Where there you go, he didn't know until, like, the next time we started dating where I'm like he met my mom, he's like, "Oh, I see, like, you guys have a different relationship,
Mhm.
than what I'm used to," where people just don't understand your boundaries.
Yeah, and so when so what you gotta ask yourself is, if someone is saying, "You shouldn't do that because it's crossing a boundary for me," it's so important to understand your value because if you are in a relationship with someone and just say for you, it's really important that you have a close relationship with your family because maybe you all get along really well and they're just you love them, you want them in your life, and you're with someone
Mhm.
who's saying, "Well, that's too much for me." And I mean, again, Everything everything in balance, right? Like, it wouldn't be fair
Yeah.
to expect your partner to commit to a weekly dinner with your family or being around them all the time. But if they're trying to control the things you do and they're saying it's based on boundary, ask yourself if your values and their values align. Like, that's just what I recommend because if there's someone that's never wants to be around family and you're someone that always does, well, your boundaries aren't aligning then. I'm not gonna say that they're not their boundaries and we want to discredit their boundaries, but just be cautious that
Mhm.
people aren't taking their boundaries and trying to weaponize them to control you.
For example, um, for any young listeners in the dating world right now, if they start pushing the boundary of getting physical in the relationship too early,
Mhm.
do not stand down on that. Like, make sure you have your boundaries set and you hold up to that too, because that's another way that they can weaponize it.
It's so funny you bring that up because I remember in the dating world, some men would be very forward and they say, well, just so you know, the physical part of the relationship is very important to me. And it's very important that I understand that that's there before I can continue forward.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, and so this is why I'm glad you bring this up for our younger listeners that are newer into this world. Your boundary has to be respected too.
Yeah.
If this person really likes you, they're going to respect your boundary that you want to take your time before you get to that level.
Mhm.
And if they don't, because to them, this is so important to them, then let them go. Let them go to
Yeah.
someone else who maybe has the same mentality they do.
Yeah.
It's so important that your boundaries are respected and in reverse that you respect others. And if you guys are at a head with what your boundaries are together, then you just might not align to be with each other.
Yep. Might just not align. And there are some things where boundaries within a relationship, there are some that are minuscule enough to compromise on. Um, that comes with your own judgment there of, is this something that I can
And what would be an
live with?
example for you of what would be a compromisable boundary?
Okay, so here is a compromisable boundary. I was used to, at the beginning of dating, just constantly texting my partner, just like constantly being in communication with them when Ollie wasn't big on that. He wasn't big on texting all the time, or he would want to wait for the conversation to be when we're together.
Mm,
And he would still like good morning, good night, some little messages in between. But then when I realized that's where he was in the communication space of texting, it actually made our in-person meetings so much more valuable
mhm,
than that constant communication in between. And I think that's where it helped me reevaluate, why do I need that constant communication? It's because I needed that validation all the time
mhm.
that I was in his mind when really we have a million things on our mind all day. I just trusted that he was still into me in between our meetings.
This is interesting because what I'm seeing here in that is that you needing to text all the time wasn't a boundary for you. It was this insecurity
Yeah.
and it was an insecurity coming through that you needed this constant validation that he was into you, right?
Yeah.
And but Ollie was setting this boundary of, look, I don't text all the time. Like I want to have valuable conversation. Me being at your beck and call to respond to you is crossing a boundary for me for my peace, my daily routine and all of that. And so it's interesting because we can either respect someone's boundary or we could take it personally. And in
Mhm.
this case, you could have said, he must not like me. I'm going to take this personally, except you trusted it and you said, okay, I'm going to respect this boundary he has and see where it goes. And
Yeah.
then you ended up,
Married.
reaping the benefits of that.
I'm now married.
Now you're married. Look at that.
Yeah, so there's some things that, like, people will have these boundaries that you might not be comfortable with that are positives, like, just something you're not used to because you're still dealing with your own insecurities, and I think that's another important thing to address too, is that example of, "Okay, I'm uncomfortable with this boundary that they set. What does this mean for me? Why am I uncomfortable about this?
Get
Where is this
curious
showing
about
up in
it.
my life?" Yeah. Um, yeah, approaching it of looking at other people's boundaries too is another interesting, because I didn't even think about that. It was an insecurity for me.
Glad we got to sort that out in this.
Well,
There you
thanks.
go.
Another epiphany.
Well, I think ending this podcast off on this wonderful revelation for you is a great way to wrap this one up. So, what do you say, Britt?
Yeah, that's like another little birthday present for me right there, having that revelation. Some more self-discovery happens
Yeah.
every day. So, to recap, today we were talking about boundaries, which can be seen as an ultimate form of self-care, because what boundaries do is they help us support our values and what we're looking to get out of life and our relationships. So, we encourage listeners, reflect on the values that you want to support in your life and how can you set up boundaries to strengthen those values. As we said, if you're acting based off of your values, you have nothing to regret. And if you have these boundaries in place, this will also help you set boundaries with relationships, with people, your friends, your loved ones, as well as your workplace, because we're all looking for that work life balance. Ask yourself, are you willing to sacrifice comfort for peace? By setting up boundaries, we are sacrificing a short term comfort for a lifetime of peace, of knowing that, again, we are acting based off of our values and things that we want to encourage moving forward. Versus if we don't have this boundary in place, we have a short term comfort for long term turmoil, living with that resentment and anger towards whatever you are dealing with.
Yes. And we also want to encourage our listeners that when people are setting boundaries with you, let's try not to take them personally initially. If you are feeling triggered by a boundary that's being set, let's get curious about it. If you feel triggered, and it's because maybe your values and their values don't align. This is why it's so important that we get so clear on what our values are, because we might be setting a boundary, someone else might be setting a boundary, and maybe it's because the values that those are based off of are conflicting. And then maybe that relationship just doesn't work. We've also mentioned that sometimes people can weaponize the use of boundaries and use it in an attempt to control. When you're really clear about your values and what your boundaries are rooted in, it's easy to be able to detect whether it's malicious or not, if it's going to align with you or not. Or it can also indicate, like with Brittany's example, with texting with Ollie when they were first starting to date, it might be triggering you because it's triggering insecurity. And this is a great opportunity to get curious about that and see how we can grow and heal and evolve. And now, I mean, look at that. Brittany took it as an amazing opportunity to work on herself, and she got herself a husband.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was a fantastic episode. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. It has been a pleasure to delve into one of many life's lessons, that is boundaries. We hope you found value in our conversation and feel inspired to get curious around how you set boundaries in life and how you interpret boundaries that are set around you.
And don't forget to join us on our next episode where we'll continue to explore and evolve together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe and share with a friend who may benefit from this episode. Follow us on social media, Instagram and TikTok at Evolving with Every Step for more insights and behind the scenes content.
And until next time, remember to embrace every experience with curiosity so you can evolve with every step. And we'll see you in our next episode.
Bye.